Dracula is portrayed as such a powerful being who can turn into a bat, can turn into mist if he chooses, can control weather, and also small animals like wolves or rats. But for the most part of the novel, he doesn't actually do anything. I've never read this before. It's where the greatest myth about my country started. Isn't that crazy? This book was first published in 1897, and back then Eastern Europe was still considered a lot behind Western Europe from a technological and scientific and general knowledge point of view. It is also just 4 years before that Princess Maria Alexandra Victoria of Edinburgh departs for Eastern Europe to marry the presumed heir and later to become King Ferdinand I of Romania. Also, during this time, Transylvania is still under the Austro-Hungarian rule. So Romania isn't the Romania we know today, Transylvania isn't part of it, and that may account for some things I found a bit off in the novel. And if it's not clear by now, we are talking about Dracula by Bram Stoker. I'm Maria from Read Fine Books. If you think you want to read this book or are curious about it, please continue watching. So, what is this book about? Well, the most famous vampire, Count Dracula. He is a vicious, blood-sucking creature who wants to create more vampires just like him. For no exact reason, he decides to move to London, and for this endeavor, he employs a solicitor, Jonathan Harker. Luckily for us, Jonathan Harker is very diligent in keeping a journal. This is how we first meet Count Dracula and kind of realize something is a bit off about him. He's a bit strange. He's a bit creepy. So, a lot happens during Jonathan Harker's stay at Dracula's castle. The Count has a wonderful castle, just as creepy as him, in the mountains in Transylvania. So, of course, Jonathan um, talks about arriving in this strange land for him. He talks about the customs here, the food. The food is actually quite good, and the food is one of my favorite things about my country, actually. Jonathan is understandably amazed by it as well. However, he talks a lot about the people here, and they, for him, seem a bit strange as well. They all seem so superstitious and have strange rituals around him. It makes the road to the castle very entertaining. And when he arrives, he is greeted by a wonderful Count Dracula. He is very polite, or welcoming, quite unexpected. He does, however, have some strange habits, and we gradually get acquainted with those too. So Jonathan Harker soon realizes that Count Dracula's intentions are not exactly very holy, not as they seem the first day he arrives there. And these dark plans may or may not involve three young ladies with brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. Somehow, Jonathan manages to escape this terrible ordeal here and return to his beloved fiancée, Mina Murray. However, troubles seem to follow him and his acquaintances because Count Dracula manages to get to London after all. At this point, we become acquainted from Mina's letters with various other characters. The most important one being Lucy Westenra, a wonderful young lady who, as we find out as soon as we meet her, manages to receive 3 marriage proposals in one day. One is from Dr. John Seward, who seems to be a psychologist who manages an asylum for mad people. Another suitor of Lucy's is Quincy Morris, who is a young and fresh Texan who speaks in slang just to amuse Lucy. And of course, the one who she actually accepts, Arthur Holmwood, who is a nobleman. So these 3 characters are important for the later development of the novel. Pay attention to them. Soon after these marriage proposals, Arthur's father becomes ill and he has to visit him. While Arthur is visiting his father, Lucy becomes more and more ill, and the finest doctors are called in for consult, one of them being Van Helsing, who is renowned for his cures. Van Helsing has his suspicions but no actual idea of what is happening. He only recognizes that Lucy seems to be losing blood, which he cannot account for, and recommends that Lucy receives blood from young men in order to feel better. His attempts are in vain because Lucy becomes more and more ill until finally she dies. And I'm sorry, that is a small spoiler. She dies and becomes a vampire, but I promise no more spoilers from here on out. So all the events unfold from here because they need to find and kill Lucy after they discover what she is exactly, because that is kind of unclear. These people don't believe superstitions. They are medicine men. They are people that are very accustomed to scientific discovery. They try to find causes for all things. However, when faced with vampires, they have no clues how to treat that scientifically. And even the fact that Lucy receives blood for many, many times, um, it's an attempt, but has ultimately absolutely no effect whatsoever. Lucy still becomes a vampire. Modern medicine is no match for vampires after all. So the struggle for these people is first to believe what is right in front of them, actually believe this creature exists, and then find out how to deal with it. That takes a long time. But when they do, they also decide Dracula must be killed, as any righteous man would decide. And of course, his plan must be stopped, even though we don't really understand what his plan is. He at least must be stopped in corrupting young ladies. So that is what these righteous men are up to, trying to stop Dracula corrupting young ladies and whatever other plans he may have. This will become an adventure in itself. However, I didn't like it very much. First of all, the book was so long. The fact that it is in epistolary form helped a lot with the suspense, but it didn't help overall. I still felt this book was too long for her own good, but that wasn't its main problem, because I've read books that are a lot longer that have been so captivating I never wanted them to finish. This wasn't the case with Dracula. Bram Stoker never went to Romania. This he tries to hide with small details like what people ate around here, what how they behaved. What I felt he got wrong, though, was the presence of so many nationalities. He talks about Slovaks, Slovenians, Hungarians, all kinds of people. And yes, Romania now is different than it was back then, but Romanians were always the majority population in this country, even under Austro-Hungarian rule. So the fact that he enumerates so many nationalities has no sense for me. Also, um, the food. I really like that he discovered mamaliga as being the favorite dish for Romanians, which it is still today. However, I haven't heard of any of the other food he mentions. That may be because they are traditionally Hungarian, who knows? I have never heard of them. These things, however, are small and unimportant, and they had no consequence at all in me liking or disliking the book. What he does in reality is reflect the Westerners' opinions on Eastern Europe. And those opinions are still relevant today. The West is always superior, even though back then it's superior in knowledge and scientific research, and today they are mostly superior in economic and financial issues. However much this saddened me, it saddened me more how he talks about Romania as a corrupt country, which unfortunately it is today as well, but not really that much more corrupt than any other European country. All these small things, however, establish an atmosphere in Romania being a beautiful but underdeveloped country. That being said, let's actually get into the action of the novel. First of all, it's in a epistolary form, and yes, that adds a lot of suspense, and we only get one point of view that, of course, doesn't know everything, and it is mysterious and exciting in a way. However, for me, all the voices that write their journals are blended together. I couldn't distinguish between any of them, and that is always a shame because it is actually symptomatic of another problem, which is character development. These characters don't seem real people, they all seem the same. Two of the characters talk a bit differently, but that is it. So nothing really substantial, nothing really important around character development. Also, I didn't feel at all connected with the characters. I didn't feel terror or fear of anything actually. I didn't like any of them in particular, not even Dracula. I think this is what also made the book so slow paced, and I actually wanted it to finish already because it feels like nothing happens until the last chapter. There are a lot of plot holes. I mean, Dracula is portrayed as such a powerful being who can turn into a bat, can turn into mist if he chooses, can control weather, and also small animals like wolves or rats. But for the most part of the novel, he doesn't actually do anything. He hides a lot and avoids all conflict. He decides to move to London for no reason. He then decides to move back to Transylvania for no reason. Other than, of course, he was being hunted, but doesn't he have the power of 20 men? He could have easily killed all of them during the night, and he doesn't. I have no understanding of Dracula whatsoever. Bram Stoker also isn't consistent at all about what he can or cannot do around his sleeping schedule, because he sometimes awake during the day but sometimes not, especially when it is convenient for the plot to for him to not be able to wake up. He doesn't. He is in such a state that um, someone can murder him in his sleep, and yet the sun only weakens him. It doesn't actually kill him whatsoever. So a lot of plot holes in my opinion. um, they took me out of the story so much because I have all these questions, all these things that simply don't make any sense to me. However, if we see Dracula for what it is, actually, the idea of East versus West, reason and science versus tradition and superstition, well, it kind of all makes sense. But that, for me, is very weak writing. And it is all the more hilarious when you have things like the blood transfusions, which are so much sexualized, or the portrayal of the voluptuous Eastern European women versus the pure Westerners. All these things are very badly written, in my opinion, and I had so much expectation from this book because it generated so many versions of vampires, and I actually prefer the modern vampires, which is so sad in a way because Dracula seemed to be in the end the most powerful one, and yet he doesn't use his powers at all. As a conclusion, I didn't like this book. Not at all. Frankly, it seemed a waste of my time, and I struggled a lot to finish it. Should you read it? I wouldn't recommend it. However, if you love vampires, you must definitely read about the most famous vampire of them all, Dracula. So, of course, if you're curious, read it. And now, you tell me, who is your favorite vampire? I do confess, around vampires, I mostly watched movies. I rarely read the actual books, but I did read all of Anne Rice's novels. Those were amazing. Isn't Lestat a lot better than Dracula? I think he is. Please comment and tell me what is your opinion. And also, if you really want to read Dracula, just know that during the month of November, there are two channels who are reading it as a group read. You can find them in the description. Reading This Life and Heather's Heroes and Heroines. They are both doing the reading on Discord, and I'm sure it will be very fun as a group read. I'm Maria from Read Fine Books. Thank you so much for watching.